Hello and welcome to our second webinar, Advocacy in 2017. I want to extend a huge welcome to everybody across the world who's tuning into this webinar today. We're very excited for the next 2 hours. We're going to be hearing some terrific tips about advocacy, and we're looking for your questions as well. So please put your questions in the comments and we'll get to as many as we can a little bit later on. First off, I want to introduce our two honoured guests today presenting, which is Gary Francione and Anna Charlton. I'll give you a little bit of background. Many of you will probably know of Gary and Anna, and maybe you've even heard them speak before. But for those of you who don't, Gary's a law professor at Rutgers University. He was the first academic to teach animal rights theory at an American university. He's the author of Rain Without Thunder, Introduction to Animal Rights, Your Child or the Dog, Animals, Property and the Law, Animals as Persons, and the Animal Rights Debate. And Anna Charlton is an adjunct professor at law at Rutgers University and co-founder with Gary Francione, Rutgers Animal Rights Law Clinic. She's the co-author with Gary of Eat Like You Care and Animal Rights, the Abolitionist Approach. Welcome, Gary and Anna.
Thank you. Good to see you, Ben.
Yes, Ben, you did not introduce Duncan. This indicates that you are a speciesist.
Hey, Duncan.
Yes.
Duncan is gathering fans.
Yes, every time we have Duncan on one of our little videos, he actually gets mail. Anyway, all right, Ben, how do you want to do this?
Well, first off, I'd love to hear about some of the tips that you've already come up with in terms of advocacy. And then if there are any other questions out there from the attendees, then we'll get you to address those first. So I'll hand it over to you two and go ahead.
All right, well, what we did was we came up with 10 suggestions, just ideas that we'd like to share with people. So you know, and then we'll discuss them. And I suspect that many of the questions that people have will involve one or more of these areas. But the first suggestion is to recognize that all conversations and discussions about animal ethics are different. You can't really set down hard and fast rules for how you discuss these things with people, because every conversation is going to be different. You know, you're going to have one conversation with people you don't know. You're going to have different conversations with friends. You're going to have different conversations with family. You're going to have different conversations with colleagues at work, and the conversations you have with people that you encounter in life are going to be different depending on you know, the dynamics involved and the situation and whatnot.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So think about it this way: every encounter is like a snowflake. They're all different. But no, I really.
Each is an opportunity.
Right. Yeah. Always look at each of them as an opportunity. You know, it's just a question. You know, you have to develop. We can give you all sorts of principles and guiding rules and whatnot, but the reality is the conversations are all going to be different, and you've got to develop a feel for these things. You've got to develop a feel, you know, for how conversations, for the circumstances, who you're talking to, what you're talking about, how did the conversation start. What are the dynamics of this? You know, I mean, you're going to have different dynamics depending on who you're speaking with. And, you know, I mean, I will have a different discussion with a student of mine about these issues than I will with somebody who's not a student, simply because the professor-student relationship is such that it's part of the circumstance of conversation.
I think what we need to be careful about when we're talking to people is that it doesn't become a presentation of a speech, because that can really shut down the person that you're talking to. So you want to be asking questions of the person that you're talking to, drawing them out, keeping their interests coming with you, reacting to what they're saying. So it isn't a wall, it isn't a rigid presentation. Then that stays personal and it's useful, it's respectful. And I think people can hear more if there's that give and take that's really tailored to the conversation that you're having and appropriate for the person that you're speaking to.
Right. Okay, we're getting a little bit of a, we're getting from the room that we're getting feedback. So we may need to pop the earphones in, just the one ear plug each, and see how that works.
It probably won't work, but
when I'm not speaking, I can mute myself. So if it's a problem, we can do it that way. But it just means when I'm speaking, people are getting feedback.
We're not, by the way.
We're getting a tiny bit, but it's not.
A little echo, but
Yeah. Now I don't. Let's see if this works.
all right.
Here, you take one. I think. Ben.
Yes.
No, I'm not hearing.
Can you hear?
I'm not hearing you through the speakers. I'm trying to see if there's a setting.
We'll leave it, and what I'll do is I'll mute my microphone when you're talking. I can't hear you. So take them out.
Hello?
Yeah, take them out, and I'll just mute myself when I'm not speaking.
Can you hear me all right now, Ben?
I can hear you all right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay.
You might need to put it in your other ear.
Okay.
Yes,
there we go.
Beautiful. Hope that improves, everybody. We've got
Okay.
hello from Cyprus and hello from Chile. So
Wow.
fantastic. Let me put it back to you. Continue.
Okay, Anna, why don't you do the second one about being an advocate?
Well, one thing I often hear is when I'm at conferences and when we're giving presentations or we're having discussions with people, so many people will come up to me and say, well, this is all very well and good, but I could never do that. And I think it's important that you find a comfort zone where you can be the best advocate that you can be. And sometimes there's a certain almost artificiality, I think, which is helpful when you're kind of getting in a role. Now, that doesn't contradict what I was saying before in terms of tailoring your conversation to the person that you're speaking to. But if you look at it as almost like a job, I'm advocating right now, this isn't personal to me, then
Right.
you're not quite so worried about any difficulty, any hostility, any sarcasm, someone throws you a zinger about plants or bacon or some other comment that you'll get on occasion. That doesn't knock you back and knock you off your stride. So it's a way of finding a way to keep confident of your message. I think that's awfully important, particularly for women, actually. I talk to a lot of my law students who are going out to advocate in general terms, literally for people, in that there's still, even in coming up to 2017, speech patterns which are more common amongst women, which is, part of it is sort of politeness and a gentleness, but you don't want it to become apologetic. So we need to get rid of this, I might be wrong, but, I just think that. So you can be polite, but you can be sure of your message. And that sometimes takes a little bit of practice. But I think if you take it slowly, when you're speaking to people and you're not quite confident, the moment of silence while you're gathering your thoughts seems like eternity in your head, and it seems inappropriate. It will be for the person that you're talking to. They probably won't even notice it. But that moment of gathering your thoughts is useful. And it stops you getting flustered and thinking later, oh, I wish I'd said it differently. You may still think, I wish I'd said it differently. But hey, that was one more practice until you get to a point where you think, I'm doing this pretty well now. I'm comfortable in this. I can do this. And another thing is that just remember, if it doesn't go well, if you don't say it quite the way you wanted to, or if you didn't get the reception that you want to, you won't die. They won't die. Your performance, which is less than you wanted it to be, won't be on their minds forever. You'll part and you'll go and do it better next time. Don't get discouraged. Keep confidence that you know what you're talking about. You'll have more confidence that you know what you're talking about if you do a bit of research before you go out there and talk. We'll talk about that in a minute. But it's a matter of calm, slow, sometimes confident communication.
Right. Would you say then you're better to get, one main thought across confidently and clearly in that regard when you're first starting out?
Oh, I think so, because, this is so important to us. And this goes really to the core of who we are as animal advocates. And there's so much emotion bound up with what we're talking about. You don't want to just open your mouth, it all comes out in a torrent, because people can't navigate through that. People can't understand and absorb it themselves if they're not at the same point of either engagement or of information. So I think it's a good point, Ben, to just take your points slowly, and you won't cover all the ground the first time. Often our contact with people is brief, but you can get them thinking, but not put out the whole scenario for them in every single engagement.
And I guess that's where, if you have a business card made up with a howtogovegan.com link on it, or one of your leaflets that are free to download and print, that's something that you can pass on. Absolutely, because it gives people another resource to go to if they have follow-up questions, or if you've sparked their interest. The how do I go vegan card, I know people give us feedback that's really helpful.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, we've got some questions in the room, but we'll still continue with your list. And
yeah, let's finish with the list. What I'd like to do, folks, is finish with the list. And
then if we haven't covered something,
if we haven't covered something, then questions can be asked, because I suspect that most of the questions are going to deal with issues that we discussed with these 10 principles. So the first one: recognize all conversations and discussions about animal ethics are different. 2, be an advocate. You're not doing it in your personal capacity. You're doing it as an advocate. The third principle is don't be a misanthropist. Assume that people are good at heart. A lot of, look, we're all aware of how much animal exploitation goes on, and we're also aware that most people don't seem to get it. A lot of animal people become people haters, and they really just don't want to deal with human beings. They don't, they're assuming that everybody they're talking to is a bad person. Well, you can't really have a productive conversation with somebody if you think that they're a bad person and that's coming across to them. So, and you know what? Unless you're really good at communication, at masking how you feel about people, it is going to come across most of the time. So, look, just assume that people are good at heart. Remember, somebody who's talking with you about this is most likely somebody who's interested, is engaged in it. I mean, there may be some people who are doing it for some other reason, but for the most part, people who are engaging you on these ideas are people who care. So assume that people are good at heart, that they want to do the right thing morally, and that it's a question, you need to educate them. You need to discuss with them what the right thing to do morally is with respect to non-human animals. But assume that they're, don't start off thinking, they're bad. These are bad people. These are people who eat meat. These are people who drink milk. These are people who wear wool or whatever. Always try to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Assume that they're good people and that they're trying to sincerely work through a moral issue. So
I guess a good thing to keep in mind is, how long have you been vegan? So imagine you're talking to yourself. For me, it would be me 4 years ago.
Absolutely.
I was very receptive. I was probably receptive 15 years ago, but that's another topic. But you think about when you became vegan, and before then, the vast majority of us were not born vegan. So you're talking to somebody who was you before you got the message.
Exactly. We raised that a little bit in the last webinar, is that we're talking to our former selves, that we've got the emotional and the ethical framework there ready to be sparked and ready just to wrap itself around this issue. So we can view people as pre-vegans, as we were, ready to come in to think about this seriously.
You say think about who you were before you became vegan. For us, that was 35 years ago. I don't remember back that far. But anyway, all right. So that's rule number 3. Assume that people are good at heart, and that they really want to engage the moral issue here. Rule number 4. Always be clear that animal exploitation is wrong and that veganism is the moral baseline. This is key. This is what distinguishes the abolitionist approach from every other approach. There is no animal organization out there, not one, that promotes veganism as a moral baseline. Certainly not the large corporate organizations. And even many of the groups that call themselves abolitionists don't really present veganism as a moral baseline. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that veganism is a moral imperative. It's something that you are morally obligated to do. It's not a matter of your journey of taking time to get. You have an obligation now to stop exploiting non-human animals, stop participating directly in their exploitation. I think it's really, really important to make that clear. I often hear from welfare, they say, well, people aren't going to go vegan overnight. And that's true. A lot of people won't. But if you have a discussion with somebody in which you're making the moral principle clear that we cannot justify eating, wearing, using non-human animals at all, end of story. If you make that clear to somebody and they're not ready to go vegan right away, they're going to choose some interim step. If they care about the issue, they're going to choose some interim step. You don't need to give them an interim step, to propose an interim step that you present as morally acceptable. That's the problem. When animal people say to others, oh, well, that's all right, become a reducitarian, reduce your intake. That's saying to people that reducing their intake morally discharges their obligation to animals. It doesn't. Okay. Similarly, eat cage-free eggs, eat crate-free pork, eat more humane animal products or happy animal products. What the message you're sending is that veganism isn't a moral baseline. It's people don't have to do it. There are other things which are morally acceptable. They're not. So we've got to be really very, very, very clear on that. I mean, if somebody says to me, because this happens a lot, where Ann and I will give a lecture. Someone will come up to us afterwards and say, listen to what you've said. As a matter of fact, I would say almost every time we give a talk, somebody says something along the lines of, I hear what you're saying and I agree with it. And I really would like to go vegan, but I can't do it right away. Well, what we always do is we try to engage that person. Why not? What's standing in the way? Well, I don't really know how to cook. We give them websites. We'll give them all sorts of information and explain to them that, that they can learn everything they need to learn to be a vegan in about 2 hours. If they don't read very quickly. Let me just get rid of that call. And that they need about 2 hours basically of preparation, and then they know everything that they need to know about veganism. But there are sometimes, after you explain to people and you show them websites about recipes and you give them information, recipes, we'll give them How Do I Go Vegan, which is our website, one of our websites, and it's really a one-stop, a source of information on all things vegan. We'll give that to them and say, look, this has got nutritional information, this has got recipes, this has got all sorts of stuff for you, and if they say, well, you know what, I'm still not, I can't do it. I just can't do it. Sometimes we'll suggest something like, well, look, why don't you do this? Why don't you try going vegan for breakfast for a week? And then you'll see that that's okay. And, you'll see that how easy that is. Then go vegan for lunch for a week. Then go vegan for dinner for a week. But we always follow up saying, look, we want to be clear about something. We're not saying it's okay to eat animal products. It isn't. It's not okay to eat it. So to the extent that you're continuing to consume those products, you're doing something that is morally wrong. That's why you're concerned. So we're not putting any stamp of approval on your continuing to consume those products. If this is how you have to do this to make it work for you, that's fine. But make no mistake about it. Any continued consumption of animal products is wrong. And it's really wrong once you've recognized that there's something very wrong. Once you've recognized, once you've heard the message and you've heard the argument, you accept the argument, then if you continue to do it, that should raise in your mind an issue about whether you take morality seriously. But always be clear that veganism is a moral baseline.
I think it's also important to remember that most of society, and in some cases encouraged by the animal groups who tell people how difficult it is to go vegan and how much help you need and how much support you need, most of society thinks it's a really difficult transition. So it's important to leave the person that you're talking to, hopefully you've had a chance for an extended interaction with them, with the clear message, as Gary was saying. And sometimes it'll take them a little while to realize that, no, it isn't so hard. And they will have gone to a site like How Do I Go Vegan and realize that their lifestyle and their cooking and their shopping is not going to change that much, that they're not going to be a totally differently functioning person. So many emails come into us, 6 months later that say, yeah, I just want to thank you for your conversation. And, for the last 2 months, I've been fully vegan and it isn't as hard as I thought it would be. Or, I just had to do a little bit of work or make whatever change I needed to in my life and my planning. But the penny often drops, but you've got to leave them with the correct message so that when it does drop, they know what the full implications of veganism
Yeah,
is.
I mean, and what you're also battling a lot of times is the fact that to the extent that these people have been exposed to this issue from the large groups all promote the idea that they reject the idea that veganism is a moral baseline. And so they just promote the idea that, well, whatever you're doing is okay because we're all working towards the same goal, which is nonsense. And so when people come up and say, well, I've got literature from this group or that group, and that they're praising the fact that Walmart has cage-free eggs. Isn't that okay? Isn't it okay? We have to sort of take it at that level. And so you're battling what is in essence, animal, you're trying to sort of counter the terribly problematic and in my judgment immoral messages that they're getting from the mainstream movement.
Just to Anna's point, and both your points about what you're already doing in terms of your habits, there is a way to be vegan in that sense. So if you are going out for a meal in the evening with friends, there is still a way to be vegan and to have vegan options. It doesn't mean you have to spend more. Whatever your level of budget, you can find a wonderful, nutritious vegan diet for that. So it doesn't mean you suddenly have to, as you've said in Eat Like You Care in our last webinar, you don't have to suddenly be buying expensive vegan foods, because you just go to your market or your supermarket and there they all are.
Exactly, because far from it, your vegan choices usually, once you get used to shopping, are usually considerably cheaper. So it's just a moment of a little bit of research and an easy transition.
Okay, rule 5 or principle 5 is always be clear that you are judging actions and not individuals. Wow, this is a big one, folks.
It's a big one.
Yes, it is. Look, if you're a vegan and you're talking to somebody about being a vegan, unless you're really, really good at it, and even if you are really, really good at it, what you are in essence saying is that that person is engaging in immoral actions, which you are saying, because that's true. They are engaging in immoral actions. But what you need to focus their attention on is the fact that you are not judging them as individuals and not saying they're bad people. You're talking about actions. You're judging actions. You're not judging individuals. This is extremely important, particularly when you're dealing with family. I mean, when you're dealing with anybody, but when you've got to make it clear. You are not saying that people are, you're not making moral judgments about them. You're making moral judgments about conduct in which they engage. That's really, really important.
And it's particularly important because animal use is so pervasive. Almost everything that we touch, buy, consume normally has some animal product involved with it. So we're really looking at the real intimacies of people's lives, their decisions about what they're going to sit down and eat every day, what they're wearing, their relationships with their families. We're really going to some pretty personal core things. So it's important to be sensitive and to listen to the person that you're speaking to so that you strike the right tone and that you can be encouraging and non-judgmental of the person. Because as you were saying, Ben, most of us have been in that position, and we need to remember what got us to where we are now so that we can encourage people in a constructive way to get there also.
You know, I take the position that what we do with animals involves fundamental rights violations and is analogous to the fundamental rights violations that we engage in where humans are concerned. So, you know, I will frequently talk about other fundamental rights violations, whether it's killing someone, raping, child molestation, other fundamental rights violations, and explain that I think that animal exploitation is analogous to those other fundamental rights violations. But that doesn't mean, you know, that your grandmother is like a child molester. I mean, I think, you know, and I you know, you go to grandma's house for Thanksgiving and grandma's making a turkey. Does that involve a fundamental rights violation? Absolutely. Is the fundamental rights violation analogous to other fundamental rights violations? Absolutely. But does that mean that, you know, grandma is on a moral level with Charles Manson? The answer is no. Not necessarily, unless you have a very peculiar grandmother. But because think about it. Morality is in large part a matter of intention. And as Anna was mentioning before, animal use, most people don't even see animal use as raising an issue of justice. And that happens as a result of a lot of reasons. It's not because animal exploitation is invisible. That is nonsense. That is complete nonsense. It's not invisible at all. It's quite visible. The problem is that most people think still in 2016, almost 2017, most people believe that you need to eat animal products to be optimally healthy. And so in the first place, you're dealing with people who think that they don't really have a choice. They've got to do this. And so that's one thing you've got to overcome. The other thing is that people have been told from the time they're very small children that using animals is okay as long as we treat them in humane ways. Now we don't, but what they hear is the first part of that animal use is okay if. What we need to do is reject that welfareism. That's why one of the many reasons why I reject welfareism is because built into welfareism is the idea that animal use is itself morally acceptable if it's conducted in certain sorts of ways. And so we've got to deal with that. Most people don't see this as presenting an issue of justice. So it's really important when you're dealing with people that, you know, you recognize that they may not understand this as an issue of justice. That's what your challenge is to get them to see that it is. But, you know, I think it's really, really important to sort of, you know, if you're dealing with somebody, you know, and if you think that the mechanized way in which we kill animals is similar to the mechanized way in which the Nazis killed Jews and Romanis and Poles and other people in the Second World War. If you know, if you, that's a perfectly plausible observation to make. But if you are treating people as though they were Nazis, that's gonna, I mean, they're going to, it's not going to be helpful for communication, because they're not. I mean, what they're doing is immoral. It's wrong. It involves fundamental rights violations. It involves fundamental rights violations that are analogous to human fundamental rights violations. But that doesn't mean that everybody's the same. We've got to be a little nuanced about this and recognize that it's actions we're judging, not individuals. We ought to make that clear to people.
And I think we can get people to understand that the mechanized slaughter of so many animals and their use in other circumstances is wrong without leaping to the analogs immediately. It's too heavy-handed. It's too much for people to take in and understand, and all they're going to hear, unless it's very well done, and unless you've got a very patient correspondent person that you're dealing with, is you're just going to hear criticism. You're just going to hear people yelling insults at you, essentially. So that's a more nuanced conversation when you're trying to understand abolitionist theory, I think. But piquing someone's interest, getting them to understand the basis of the problems of animal use doesn't need to go there. I think it's very counterproductive.
All right, I see there's a million questions, so we're going to try to run through these. All right, principle number 6. Do
we'll
not
go back to this.
Right, we're going to go back.
Blanket statement. Please do not assume that people are stupid.
Right, people are not stupid. I mean, there's a lot of, many animal people are really elitist. You know, they think that well, people can't. You can't talk to them about veganism because they won't understand it. That is complete nonsense. That is complete utter nonsense. It's elitist. It is ridiculous. It's wrong. It's counterproductive.
We speak to many different sorts of audiences, different age levels, different levels of education, different experience, and it's amazing. People will get the message in all sorts of different circumstances, and quite honestly, the university setting is one where people are often most resistant.
Yeah.
So have confidence in your message, confidence in the person that you're speaking to, their good nature, their interests, their basic ethics, and the conversation will really go well.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is really important is, in many ways, this is not rocket science. Sometimes I hear animal people use jargon,
right,
that is completely unnecessary. I mean, I can have an academic discussion with anybody, but I think in a lot of ways, sometimes I see animal people approaching things in ways where they complicate things unnecessarily, and they try to make it look as though this is really, you've got to have some sort of, you've got to have a graduate degree in philosophy to understand this. And the answer is no, you don't. I mean, if you want to talk philosophy, we can talk philosophy, but you know what? You don't have to talk philosophy in order to get to these basic ideas. The basic ideas are really not difficult at all. Most people can understand them just fine. And the number of people who need to have a discussion on the sort of on a theoretical level that brings in a lot of the jargon, that's a very small segment of people that that need that sort of discussion. But I was having a debate with someone last year from one of the large animal welfare companies, Viva, in Britain, and he was talking about how, well, we can't talk about veganism as a moral baseline to single moms because they're just not going to get it. And the answer is, sorry, that's nonsense. They get it just fine. I mean, I talk to people we both talk to people from every walk of life in every circumstance. I mean, the university we teach at is in Newark, New Jersey, which is an economically deprived area. We've had plenty of single moms in our classes, and they get it just fine. So this is the idea that, we have somehow this sort of special knowledge is just nonsense. It's complete nonsense. Do you want to add anything before I let
No, I just think generally we can get, hey, there you go. I just think, let's get rid of that.
Right.
I think that we can get rid of a lot of the ologies and the isms and the language of deconstruction and stuff like that, which generally doesn't clarify anything. Good ideas are usually fairly simple when you strip them down, and you can communicate them in that way, which is not simplifying them in a way that's thinking that your listener is stupid. It means that good ideas, good basic ethical principles can be communicated in a way that are generally understood. So if you have confidence and you can speak to people in plain language from that understanding and a good heart, it's interesting to see the results that you can get. So have confidence when you advocate in the coming year.
When you're engaging in a conversation with somebody and you're starting to use words like reify and ontology and things like that, then you know the discussion is no longer about animals, it's about you and about your effort to show how smart you are, and that's just counterproductive. But as I say, the number of people you need to use any sort of technical jargon with in order to have a conversation, very small, and that's the sort of the university crowd. But the rest of the world, you don't need to do that. These are not complicated ideas, and people can get them just fine. Okay.
And I guess as you said, the way in, is often around you and the setting that you find yourself in with that person, whether it's at the vet, as you've talked about before,
right,
or at the supermarket or whatever. I mean, that's the way in, if to start a conversation and know on what level, I don't mean academically, but on what level to engage the person.
Right. I mean, this is going to affect so many aspects of their everyday life. So we need to address everyday living. This is something that goes to the core of how we function as humans. So it's terribly important that this isn't a sideshow. It's not something that's academic in the worst sense of the word.
Okay, principle number 7, do not get defensive. Respond, don't react. Very important.
Yeah, we'll go back.
Breathe.
Yes, breathe.
Exactly.
Breathe.
It's not about you.
Right. Don't get upset
you.
with people. Don't get upset with, just breathe. Sometimes people look, let me be frank. The number of times in my life I have had people ask me about what about plants, or what about the fact that Hitler was a vegetarian, which he wasn't a vegetarian. But people ask you all sorts of annoying questions. And what you need to do is just basically not react to what they're saying, respond to what they're saying. I actually find many times people ask me the plant question or make a comment about Hitler because they really are engaged and they don't know, they don't really have anything to say. So they they come up with something that seems to you to be sarcastic or dismissive. And in fact, what they're really saying is, help me through this. I don't really, I'm having trouble understanding this, or I'm having trouble dealing with it because I think you may be right and I'm not sure how to respond. So, but in any event, never lose your temper. Never lose.
Sorry.
I just lost my earpiece here.
Attached.
Okay, yes, we are a little attached. And what we try to do all the time, I mean, frequently people will ask, questions which they intend to be sarcastic, but as I say, oftentimes that masks the fact that they're troubled by what you're saying, and so this is the first level of response you're getting. But also remember this: you're not the one in the slaughterhouse, in the stockyard waiting to be let into the slaughterhouse. You're not the one in the lab. You're not the one. You're not the animal who's being victimized. So stop thinking about yourself as a victim. Animal people, unfortunately, have a great ability to self-victimize, and that really should stop. I mean, the number of times people have asked me over the years, how is it that you're able to do this all the time and you don't burn out? And I always say, you know what? I don't have a right to burn out. That's not my right. I'm not the one who is in the cage waiting to be killed. I'm not the one in the stockyard waiting to be let into the slaughterhouse. I'm not the one stuck in the zoo. I'm not the one, I'm not the one who's being victimized. I consider this a great honor that I do this work. And I get up every day and I do it. And I love doing it. I mean, I don't like thinking about this issue because I wish it was not something that human beings did. I wish we were nonviolent to non-human animals and to each other, but we are violent. You know, many human beings engage in violent activity, and so we've got to deal with this. But you know, we're not the ones being victimized. It's the animals who are being victimized. So I think it's really important when people say to me, how do you control yourself from getting upset with people? And the answer is, what's the option? Tell me
Yep.
what the option is. And the answer is always to sort of recognize that you're having a conversation with somebody, you're addressing something that is fundamental to them, that deals, as Anna said, deals with sort of, you know, the really important aspects of their lives. You're throwing them into some turmoil because they may not have thought about this before. They may have never thought about this issue as a matter of justice. They may have thought about it as, well, we ought to be kind to animals, but they never translated that as to a moral obligation of justice. So I think it's really important to, you know, when you're talking to people, you know, be calm. And yeah, there are people going to say some really annoying things to you. And at some point, you may have to end the conversation if the person becomes abusive or something. But I think it's really important to put it in perspective. Who's the victim here? You or the animals that you're trying to help?
I think also is giving yourself and the conversation a chance to slow down a little bit. In that many people have an idea of what vegan advocates may be. And that may be someone who's been yelling at them or marching with a placard or demonstrating or picking someone to yell at as an accusation, which is a distancing. It has a distancing effect. You're not engaging with someone when you're shouting at them. Also, if you're doing one-on-one abolitionist advocacy, you're not asking them for money or anything else, which is also a barrier that goes up. So give people a moment for the defenses to settle down. You're not accusing them of anything. As we said, you're not saying that they're bad or they're stupid, and you don't want anything from them. You're asking them, how can you help them to see this issue? I think it's a very different dynamic, and that can be much more productive.
The eighth principle is, we're moving through as quickly as we can, is don't get frustrated. Yeah. Education is hard work. You'll get the same question 14 million times. You know, this is hard work. If you're going to do this and take it seriously, you know, you'll get people who are sarcastic. You'll get repeated questions. You'll get people not understanding what you're trying to say. And when somebody doesn't understand something I'm saying, I always assume it's because I haven't done a good job explaining it. But always, this is hard work. Don't get frustrated. This actually goes back to something Anna said in the beginning. And that is, if you have a conversation with somebody and it's not the best conversation you've ever had, it's okay. You'll have another opportunity. But always remember, you know, it's hard work. Don't get frustrated. Anyone want to add?
No, I think that's it. And that ties in again, but that's not about you. That it's an important message that you're communicating, and so give yourself a bit of leeway not to do the best job on every single encounter. You can't script it. It will. There's a dynamic that obviously goes when you're talking to someone, and often I think your impact is a lot more productive than you even thought.
The ninth principle is learn the basics. You have to be a student first before you become a teacher. One thing I find very frustrating is someone gets into this, becomes a vegan, and then starts an organization or sets up a website and becomes an expert. It's really very frustrating because most of the time, as a matter of fact, almost all of the time, people who do that don't know what they're talking about. And I see this all the time. I mean, I see it on the internet all the time. People claiming to be abolitionists, they don't understand what abolition is. You know, but yet they say they're abolitionists. And so, you know, take some time to learn before you go out and teach. That doesn't mean you have to get a PhD in philosophy. It doesn't mean that you have to, you know, we're not talking about that. We're talking about, in order to talk about this sensibly with people, you need to have some background. You need to have thought about the issues. I mean, one of the main reasons we wrote Eat Like You Care was really not for it was intended to some degree for non-vegans who wanted to become vegan, but it was intended primarily for vegans to teach them how to deal with the common objections they're going to get when they go out and talk to people. And so it was an educational tool for vegan educators primarily. It was also secondarily a book to get people who weren't vegan to go vegan. But it was primarily a training manual for vegan advocates to sort of give them a framework to discuss things. As I say, you don't have to get complicated. Eat Like You Care is not a complicated book. And the basic ideas, I mean, I'm a big believer in the view that if you understand something, you can explain it to a child. And I don't really care whether that's the principles of veganism or quantum theory or, I always tell my law students, if you really want to know, if you understand something, see if you can explain it to your child or your sister or brother or, some young person in your world. See if you can explain it to a child. If you can, you understand the concept. If you can't explain the concept to a child, then you probably don't understand the concept, because I'm a big believer that if you understand something, you can explain it simply. And I think that's really important. You've got to explain things simply, not because people are not able to get it, but because oftentimes you don't have a very long time with people. You've got a very brief window. You've got to get ideas across in a simple way. You've got to engage them, okay? But you don't have to get complicated to engage them. These ideas are not inherent. I mean, as I say, if you understand it, you should be able to explain it really simply. But you got to train yourself to do that, and it's really, I think it's a problem when, people show up on a vegan page, they get excited about it, and then they go and start an organization, or they go and start a page, or they go and start some group, and they're educating other. And most of the time, these folks don't know what they're talking about. So educate yourself before you become an educator.
Last point.
Last point.
Practice, 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 practice.
Right.
So you're going to have lots of opportunities to speak to people. You will get better. Your confidence will grow. You will get good feedback. You will learn how to use the concepts. You will learn how to, when it's time to give people, appropriate to give people materials, what to point them to. Spend some time on the Abolitionist Approach website, not just the Facebook page. There are essays on practically every subject that you will encounter questions about. They're free materials for everybody. Just spend that time, learn a little bit, do a bit every day. Your confidence will grow and your effectiveness will grow.
As you say, and there's a search function there. So if you have something about pets or
Right.
whatever the term is, pop it in there, and there should be an article linking you to something about that. That's exactly
Absolutely.
right. You don't need to go and buy books. If you can, that's great, because they're terrific.
But there are absolutely free resources at your fingertips.
I mean, abolitionistapproach.com and howdoigovegan.com have tons. I mean, there are hundreds of essays on abolitionistapproach.com that people can read, all sorts of essays that I've written, that we've co-written over the years. There are videos, there are audio presentations, there's stuff on every conceivable issue, and it's all free. How do I go vegan? There's stuff on nutrition, there's stuff on ethics, there's stuff on, and it's all free. So there's a lot of, but you ought to read this stuff before you go out and try to teach it to other people. You ought to at least inform yourself as to the basics of, before you go out and try to change the world. It's good to sort of understand, have a framework that you can use to affect that change.
A terrific question has come up here that's good in terms of you just finishing those points, and that is from April, and says, will these principles be available in written format?
Yes, we're working on a book now. We don't have a title for it yet, but that's usually the last thing we come up with. But yeah, we're working on a book that deals with vegan advocacy, and
but there are advocacy essays on the website
Yes,
also.
yeah. There's I think it was a podcast I did on a few years back on how to talk to non-vegans about veganism, but I think there were only 5 principles. They've now it's now morphed into 10. But yeah, I mean, we're working on a book now where we're going to be talking about, you know, how to approach various situations, where to advocate, what to advocate, you know, things like that. And we're presently working on that. I hope it will be done by the early spring.
And also on YouTube, I believe there are all the presentations from some really wonderful abolitionist advocates from last year's World Vegan Summit. I think those presentations are up on YouTube. I think that's people doing great work, so that's helpful to listen to also.
Yeah, we had an excellent panel that Dr. Frances McCormick organized, in which she had a number of abolitionist advocates talking about abolitionist advocacy. As a matter of fact, you were there by video, and you know, I think that's actually a useful presentation. But there's a lot of stuff out there that you can get. You don't have to wait for the book. The book is going to basically focus on specific advocacy situations. And you know, as I was looking at the chapter today, which starts out, "Where should I advocate?" And it's, you know, it's many pages long, but the initial response is anywhere and everywhere. Advocate anywhere and everywhere and all the time. And you know, never look at every situation in which you find yourself as an opportunity for advocacy.
Perhaps if we can get those 10 points that you just made as dot points up on the Abolitionist Approach to Animal Rights Facebook page, just as a starter, and obviously when the book comes out, people can get more in depth.
Sure. That'd
be great. Okay, I'm getting questions coming through everywhere on my phone and everything. So
and your phone and everything.
I'll just dive in. Okay. This is from Abi Masenfiel. I'll apologize if that's not how you pronounce your name, but Abi or Abi. Can you comment on the distinction between advocacy on behalf of the animals and the line that eating animals hurts humans in terms of health, environment, human hunger, need to bring it back to eating animals hurts animals? So basically, yeah. Did you get that? So the difference between the advocacy on behalf of the animals and people wanting to go off on a tangent about
right. I think it's the other issues. They're important issues, but they're really peripheral to the ethical argument. So we need to get that ethical argument out strongly and clearly. The health and the environment and things like that are often very fact specific. We're not each of us is not necessarily the expert on things like that. We can point people to those issues, but they need to have the core ethical framework in their head first, or else you can think of situations in which it might not be detrimental to a person's health or the environment or something for a specific animal use to continue. So we don't want to be dependent on the facts of the situation like that to erode the core ethical framework, I think. You get your discussion becomes too diffuse and can be more up for sort of grabs in terms of what your view of the facts are and things like that. I don't have medical training. I can point people to the fact that otherwise respected medical groups, dietary groups and everything have said that a vegan diet is at least not less healthy than any other diet that they would pursue. So that answers the ethical question about whether it's necessary. So you can point people to things like that, but getting lost in the thicket about any other fact-specific situation, I think, can can become confusing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, you've got to talk to people about health insofar if they believe they need to eat animals to be healthy. You're not going to make it very far in the moral argument with them, because if you're in essence telling them, I did a video. What do you call it when you do these short videos on Facebook, Ben? What are they called? Video blogs or video? What are they called? What's the expression?
Sorry, say that one again.
When I do these short videos on Facebook.
My thought for the day, it could be a vlog. Yeah.
A vlog. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, well, there's a vlog on the website dealing with this issue. That, you know, if you're telling people they have a moral obligation to go to stop eating or using animals, and they believe that that's absolutely necessary, then you're telling them they have a moral obligation to do something which is going to harm them, which is you're not going to get very far with the moral argument. So I'm a big believer in explaining to them that they're not going to be any less healthy if they eat a vegan diet. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a dietitian, and I will point them to literature from government organizations and professional organizations that say that eating plants only is a perfectly healthy way to live. And indeed, some of those organizations say that you can even be healthier. But you know, my view is that the only point I'm really interested in making is that they're not going to be less healthy. As far as the environmental argument is concerned, I think it's absolutely clear that animal agriculture is destroying the world. But you know, and I talk about that to some degree, but I don't see it as a primary issue. You know, a few months ago, I was invited to a local university to comment on, they showed Cowspiracy. I don't know if you've seen that, Ben, but
yes.
Okay. Well, they showed Cowspiracy and they asked me to comment on it. And, you know, and I commented and said, well, you know, this is somewhat strange to me because it's like, it reminds me of something that my old friend Bob Torres, who was one half of the Vegan Freaks many years ago, Bob Torres said, talking about the environmental aspects of animal exploitation is like talking about the environmental aspects of you know, transporting people to the death camps in the Second World War. You know, it would be very odd if someone said, well, you know, it was really, you left a very bad carbon footprint with all that, you know, burning people and gassing people and all that sort of stuff. It was a really bad, it was bad for the environment. That would be, we would find that an odd, we would find that an odd thing to focus on. And so when we're talking about the environmental aspects of it, I always say, look, there's no doubt that animal agriculture is an ecological disaster, but that's not really the interesting question. The interesting question is, it's a massive injustice. It's wrong. It's a moral wrong. There are other aspects about it, but it's a moral wrong.
I just saw a question here that I thought was very relevant, having just, you know, we're in the middle of the festive season. This is from Matt. How can I best re-engage family members who I've had conversations with about veganism in the past, who have basically agreed with the arguments for veganism as a moral imperative, but who after many months have not gone vegan?
Oh boy, can that be frustrating. Really, often dealing with those that are who are closest to us is the most frustrating, and it can be emotionally difficult, really, because you care so much about it, and you think if they cared about you, they would have heard you in a deeper way. So your family can be really difficult. I think if you're having trouble with your family, I think you just go on and talk to somebody else, quite honestly, and see that you can have an effect there. Sometimes it's hardest to hear a message from somebody you're close to because of all those elements that Gary was talking about, you know, that someone's accusing you of something, or they're saying that you're bad.
All the weird family dynamics.
Right, all that comes up. Plus, you're often having the conversations, as the person asking the question just said, over the traditionally celebratory dinner, which has got an animal corpse in the middle of the table. So it's really the worst time to really bring up the vegan issue. I just tell people there's really no right or wrong answer to all of this, but I think if people can see that you're a happy, functioning, pleasant, engaged vegan person. You're the best example. And then at another appropriate time, perhaps they will raise the issue, or you can reapproach them. But I wish I had a better answer, because there are lots of people who are close to me who are not vegan, which is disappointing. But you can still be a great vegan advocate. Hey, perhaps they'll listen to somebody else as advocacy spreads.
And I also think you should never underestimate the power of witness. In other words, you're there.
Right.
You're there. You're making a statement by not consuming that stuff on moral grounds. You're making a statement, and that statement, whether you say any words, that statement is being made to people. I mean, one thing I think that you can do is, to the extent that you can find out, like if you've got family members who say, "Look, I agree with you," and they haven't yet gone vegan, well, talk with them and say, "Well, if you agree with me, then, and you think that there are some moral issues here, and you agree with my analysis, what can I do to help you? I mean, is it a matter of is it a matter of food preparation, or is it a matter of you don't know what you should eat or whatever?" I mean, again, this is one of the reasons why we did the website How Do I Go Vegan, was to answer those sorts of questions, so that when people had basic questions about veganism, they could go somewhere. We even provide mentoring if someone if someone wants to interact with somebody live, we will provide mentoring to people. Again, we're not providing nutritional advice or anything like that, but if somebody says, "Look, I just don't know what do I eat tonight? Oh my God, I don't know what I'm gonna eat." Right. Well, we can help them through that situation.
And saying, what can we eat tonight? Choose a fantastic, simple dish that becomes your signature dish and take it to your family dinner.
Absolutely.
Let's get away from the vegan cupcakes, wonderful as they are. Man cannot live by cupcakes alone. Take something that someone can imagine, I could make that in 20 minutes when I came home from work. I don't have to start from scratch and grind the flour and put my organic arugula, to sprout and stuff. Mm-hmm. This is real, easy, simple, approachable, not expensive food. Just be the happy participant who makes the idea of going vegan easier.
Yeah, and you'll find, as we did recently, that when we take that wonderful, signature dish or two to an event, that it gets gobbled up very quickly.
Absolutely. By Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't want to denigrate the cupcakes. I mean, I think people like sweets. Whether they should eat them and to the extent that they do is a different question. But people like them, and that's one of the things that a lot of people think, if you're a vegan, you're never going to get good cakes and
right.
pastries and things like that. And so I do think that bringing, some of these dairy, these vegan dairy desserts are excellent. They're better than cow's milk ice cream, in my judgment, or at least my recollection of what that tasted like from 35 years ago. But and I think that there are all sorts of really great items that like pastries and cupcakes and stuff like that. And I think bringing some of those, I mean, again, I wouldn't bring just that, but I would bring, I certainly don't see a problem with that, because a lot of people think, oh my God, they eat styrofoam and they eat, it's a barren way of eating.
Yeah, I think, sort of speaking to adding to, rather than feeling like you're going to be deprived of
exactly.
food as a vegan. I found that I eat a lot more interesting things than I ever did before.
Sure.
And I've added to my diet instead of taken away. So yep. Definitely, that's been something that I've tried to put across. When it comes to food in this conversation, this is something that ties in really well. Anna, you said that these conversations often do come at the dinner table while people are eating non-vegan foods, if you're eating with family or friends. So what is your view about sitting down with people when they are eating non-vegan foods? I had that happen recently where somebody asked that very question. How do you feel while I'm sitting here eating animals?
Well, I hear of people who say that they've made the decision that they will no longer eat with people who are eating animal foods, and I will respect that line that they draw. I think if you're going to do that, because most of the world presently eats animal foods, you're losing an opportunity for constructive engagement with people. As we were saying before, you don't. I think we run the risk of reinforcing the idea that you're withdrawing and you're becoming a bit odd or something, someone that people can't relate to because of your decision about veganism. So that's a worry, I think, in those situations. I think you always say no. You know, you thank people because people often don't know what you are going to eat if you're following vegan principles. So you just say, no, I don't eat that. I always say, don't eat that rather than I can't eat that. You've made the decision not to eat it. But as we said, if you've brought something of your own to share, that can be a bridge with people. It can be something that's cheerful and positive. Family dinners can be difficult, though. Let's not let's not skirt that issue. They can be difficult, but let's turn it into something that's at least has positive aspects that people can take away from the experience.
I try to work it into every aspect of the conversation. So if somebody says to me, "Oh, I've got this, can you eat it?" and it's got some animal ingredient in it, as Anna said, I will say, sure, I could eat it. I choose not to. And let me tell you why. and you know, again, part of this is how you talk to people and how you interact with them. So if somebody says, if I'm at a, you know, like as frequently happens, someone will say, how do you know, I'm going to be eating, you know, I'm going to order steak. How do you feel about that? I will answer that question honestly. I said, well, you know, I don't really think you should. I think you're engaging in immoral activity. But if that's what you wish to do, if you wish to engage in that immoral activity, then that's your choice. And I've ended up having very interesting discussions by answering that question in exactly that way. So when people say to me, "Oh, you know, you're the vegan," yeah, you know, I'll go out with a group of people from the university and they say, "Oh yes, Gary's the vegan. How do you feel about," you know, and then they ask me, how do I feel about the fact that there are dead animals on the table? And I'll answer that question honestly. Well, I think it's immoral. I don't think you should be doing it. I won't participate in it. If you wish to do it, that's your moral decision, but I don't really think you can justify what you're doing. And you know, I don't call them Nazis. I don't call them child molesters. I don't attack them. I simply say what I think they're doing is immoral. And that
you can also turn it into something lighter and positive. You can just say, I'm choosing a vegan dish tonight. That's really good. You know, or can I point you to something? Or do you want to try a bit of mine or something? There's ways to stop the accusation, but keep the clear message going.
You got to keep, you always have to be clear. This is an issue of fundamental justice. You should never shy away from that. You should never downplay it. You should never, it's an issue of fundamental justice. You should always be clear about that. But that doesn't mean that you have to withdraw from interacting with everybody who engages in fundamental rights violations, because it goes on around you every single day. 95%, 98% of the people out there are doing it. So unless you're going to go live in a cave, you're going to be interacting with people who are engaging in these fundamental rights violations. Part of what I mean when I say shifting the paradigm is we've got to get people. Right now, we are focused as a society, and this is actually this is cross culture. I mean, in many ways, it doesn't really matter which society you go into, but the idea is basically, to the extent that there's an issue there at all, it's an issue about treatment, some variant of a treatment issue. What we need to do is to move the discussion in the direction of talking about use. That's what's really important. And once you get people talking, I mean, see, that's the problem. There's really no context in which they have the discussion about use, because the treatment framework is so dominant. You know, and that people, you won't have trouble if you sit down with people and start talking to them about the humane treatment of animals. You won't have any trouble getting everybody to agree with you. But that's not going to get anybody anywhere, and it doesn't really change anybody's behavior.
One thing I would add also, it doesn't mean that you become the punching bag or an object of derision. If you want to sit down and enjoy your dinner, it doesn't mean that you have to counter stupid repeated questions from people that are designed to bait you. That's not that's not something that you would tolerate on another issue. You shouldn't have to tolerate it on this one. And once you've if you're talking about friends, it's perfectly appropriate to say, I really can't enjoy my dinner much if I'm looking at a dead body on the table. You might want to say it a different way than that, but is it okay with everyone if we choose a vegan restaurant tonight? You know, just put it out there as a positive thing. If someone says no, it means that they are making a point about their right to eat meat in front of you, and you might question about whether you want to keep them as your close friends. So draw lines so that it's still pleasant for you. I don't think you have to take aggravation from people around you on the food issue. You have to be respectful of them while you're talking to them, but you can require respect from people.
Yeah, I mean, every time I'm required to set up some event at the university, I always choose a vegan restaurant. And if anyone objects to that, I always say, fine. Well, then you want to take over the responsibility for setting it up? You can do that. And everybody says, no, that's okay. You can do it. And I set it up at a vegan restaurant. And again, that's been a useful way of introducing people to veganism. It's easy. Activism is something you can do every single day. As a matter of fact, you got to really, in many ways, go out of your way not to engage in activism, because there's so many different opportunities that present themselves. You just need to learn how to read situations and see the activist opportunities there. Activism is not just going in the street holding signs. Activism is tabling. Activism is online. The internet has provided an absolutely, I mean, look, I find it remarkable. Tomorrow, we have something called Thunderclap going. And by the way, those of you out there listening, please go to Thunderclap. If you go to Thunderclap, you will see that we have actually you can get the
information is on the Facebook page.
Yeah, the URL is on the Facebook page. Gary L. Francione, the Abolitionist Approach to Animal Rights. If you go there, you'll see our Thunderclap event. Go to Thunderclap. If you authorize Thunderclap, they will insert a one-time message in your Facebook profile or your Twitter feed or your Tumblr feed, presenting a message of abolitionist veganism and giving people the URL to howdoigovegan.com. Please go there. This is going to go tomorrow afternoon at 12 o'clock noon. So it's an opportunity. I mean, again,
write yourself a note now.
Right now we have, let me see, I will tell you right now, we have 590,000 people who are going to get that message tomorrow. 590,000. So go to Gary Francione, the Abolitionist Approach to Animal Rights. It gives you the URL, and make sure you get the right URL, because there are some other animal campaigns on the Thunderclap site that are not abolitionist and do not present veganism as a moral baseline. But the link is on my Facebook page, and you can't trash the internet too terribly much when it allows you to get out a message to 590,000 people. People who are on, you're on discussion groups, engage people. What the internet has done is it's lowered the opportunity cost of communication. I mean, it used to be the case, in order to talk to people, if you didn't talk with them personally, you had to talk to them on the phone, and you had long distance charges if you talked to them long distance, and you were limited. Now, look at this. There are 350 people sitting here on the webinar, and you're in Australia, and we're on the East Coast of the United States, and we're having a discussion with 300 and some odd people I mean, you can't trash the internet. It's an actually very useful educational tool. So use every tool available to you. Internet advocacy is perfectly fine. Get out there and table. Get out there and talk to people in supermarkets. Talk to people in, talk to people anywhere you can. Talk to people in veterinarians' offices. Talk to people at work. Talk to people, and just keep talking to people, because remember something. If we took every person who was a vegan right now, and in the next year, in 2017, every one of those people did was turn one other person on to veganism. And then the following year, the same thing happened. And the following year, the same thing happened. The following year, the same thing happened. The world will be vegan in about 15 or 17 years or whatever. I have to work out the numbers again. But basically, the world will be vegan in a fairly short period of time. So, the power of one, don't underestimate it. Don't think you need you don't need a large, first of all, you don't need a large organization to go vegan. You don't need a large organization. You don't need to make donations. You don't need to do any of that stuff. It's a decision you make. And then you go out there and you educate anybody and everybody who will listen to you.
Just have a question regarding having the conversations, being the calm, collected, educated advocate that's having a conversation, and that line that we sometimes cross where we self-deprecate about being a vegan in order to ease the perceived sometimes tension between yourself and the person you're having a conversation with. Can you speak to that at all?
What do you actually mean by self-deprecation in that context?
Oh, make a vegan joke about yourself.
We don't do that sort of stuff.
Well, there's a way to present yourself as a warm, approachable person that someone wants to talk to. I think that's what I was trying to say before, is that perhaps the stereotype, if it's come down to that, of the person who's yelling and accusing because they're vegan, and also this idea that people say defensively that, oh, vegans are sanctimonious or something. No, you can't shake them from their belief about the rightness of veganism. That doesn't make them sanctimonious, or else it shouldn't. So I think you can be the individual who smashes that stereotype in their minds. And one thing I talk about repeatedly is that don't underestimate the influence that you can have on your circle of friends, colleagues, associates, acquaintances, because they see you as an individual. And if they respect you and they see you as you've got it together in other parts of your life, they're attracted to your thinking on other subjects. They respect you for your clarity of thinking on other things, that you don't tell nasty jokes, you don't tell off color, this sort of things, you don't slip into bad behavior. Then they're going to be more respectful and attracted to your ideas on veganism too. I think it's very helpful for you to be the person that counters the useful stereotype that people have had to and have used to dismiss vegans, that you're not difficult and you're not rigid and you're not strange. You're the teacher and you're the nurse and you're the social worker, but you just happen to be vegan. It's an important part of who you are, but it's in no way detracted from who you are and how you function in any other way.
Look, I have to tell you, I don't find it difficult at all to talk to people about veganism. I mean, there are some people who are simply not interested in morality, in which case you just sort of you move on to the people who are interested, because, there are lots of them who are. So if someone's really not interested, you don't waste time. You go on to talk to people who are interested. You cannot get people interested. If people really do believe that animals have no moral value, then just move on. But I don't really have a problem engaging people all the time about veganism and animal rights as a general matter and other aspects of the abolitionist approach. The people you have trouble with are animal people who are into the welfarist paradigm. Those people are very, very difficult. They're like a wall, and they just, you have arguments. I mean, they get nasty. they present all sorts of problems in terms of, they don't discuss things rationally. They get very emotional. They get really horrible. They act in very aggressive and nasty ways if you in any way challenge them. But I find, as a general matter, when you're dealing with regular people, you can get people really engaged in this issue. Most people actually find it interesting to talk about this issue.
Yep.
And the number of times that Ann and I have heard, we're so happy that we are able to have a discussion with you about that, because, to the extent that we've ever really tried to discuss this with anybody before, we've gotten yelled at, or we've had, they will say something about how problematic they think the PETA approach is, or, this approach or that, whatever. And they're just so happy for somebody to sort of sit and discuss it rationally and in an enthusiastic and passionate way, but in a way in which they don't feel threatened. So I don't really think, in many ways, I just don't think this is as difficult as a lot of people think it is. I think a lot of people who are interested in abolitionist veganism basically focused on the idea that veganism is a moral baseline. It is a moral imperative. It's not an option. It's not a matter of lifestyle. It's a matter of moral obligation and justice. I think that people who believe that, who are into the work that we do, and then they encounter animal people from these large, who are involved with these large organizations, who get very hostile and angry with them, and then they get frustrated. I mean, but I it's unfortunate, because you're dealing, and then we have a section of the book. We have a different section of the book that we're writing about how do you talk to other animal people about veganism, because most animal people.
Sometimes that's the hardest conversation.
In many ways, in many ways, that's the hardest conversation to have.
And we do have a question in the room from Holly to this point, and said, how do you deal with organizations like Direct Action who belittle your advocacy, put my teeth back in, and try to point out that unless you're involved in what they call direct action, that you're actually harming the animal rights movement? Well,
I wrote an essay about direct action everywhere. I think, I've made it clear what I think of them as a group. And this idea that activism is going into a restaurant and yelling while people are eating, but that tabling or engaging in other vegan advocacy, presenting veganism as a moral baseline, is not advocacy in their judgment. That's fine. That's silly. That's absurd. I just basically ignore them. I mean, unfortunately, people like DXE and a lot of the PETA, the PETA protests, which are actually more geared toward sensationalism and promoting the organization. I think that those sorts of activities turn off a lot of people. Particularly, since DXE takes this position, which it just is absurd, that it's not veganism which is the moral baseline, but activism.
How do you know what that means?
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't think they know either what it means. But this idea that that if they go into a restaurant, I was actually talking to DXE people about this, and if you go into a restaurant and say it's not food, it's violence, and somebody says, well, what ought I to do? Aren't you going to tell them that they should be vegan? No, we're going to tell them they ought to be activists. This is what I think of as unclear thinking. That's the most charitable thing I can say about it. What do I say about those people? What I say to those people who try to belittle my advocacy? I've been doing this work now for 30 years.
I think what you say is...
Yeah, exactly.
Do not waste your time.
Exactly.
Life is too short. On to the next thing.
I've been doing this work for 30 years, and the moment I started, actually more than 30 years, the moment I started in the late 80s, early 90s, criticizing the welfarist approach, I have been attacked in absolutely outrageous ways by animal people who don't know how to deal with my arguments, so they attack me. And it's been good training, because basically I just ignore them.
Just move on.
And I move on.
Right.
And you know what? The people who were attacking me in 1990, they're not around anymore. I'm still doing it. The people who are attacking me today, they won't be around in a few years. They'll move on to some other activity, and I'll still be doing this. I mean, one day they will still be here, because I will just get old and die. But until that time comes, I just keep doing what I'm doing, and I ignore them. I deal with their positions. I will write things. What's really interesting is I will make substantive arguments. They come back and they just attack me in ad hominem ways. Okay, fine. That's fine. They want to do that, they can do that.
Great question from the room from Jean. Any specific hint on how to deal with obvious trolls on social media and in vegan groups, for example?
Well, I'm not on social media, so,
yeah,
I'll leave it to him.
She doesn't have a Facebook account. God created the delete button. It was a great creation, and use it often. My view is if somebody shows up on the page, I like to engage people. What I don't like is people who show up on the page who don't know what they're talking about, who start telling me what it is I should think or do or whatever. But if people are informed and they disagree, I love having discussions with people, and I love it. You know, when people disagree with me, I'm happy to exchange with them. When people show up and don't know what they're talking about, or when they get abusive, or when they come, I mean, at some point you make the determination that, just because they have a keyboard and an internet connection doesn't mean I have to pay attention to them. And if they start disrupting the threads, I delete them. I just get rid of them. And that's it.
Yeah, if you're in somebody else's group where you can't delete them, you can always go to their profile and block them from your personal profile.
Exactly.
You don't have to see it.
Exactly.
Right, exactly. I think you can have a bit of self-protection here. We don't have to take all the slings and arrows from people with their keyboards and their fake profiles, and we're not trying to have a constructive conversation.
Yeah, I've had actually comically the past 2 days or 3 days, I've had this person. It's clearly the same person, and this person who has been creating false profiles.
And we know who you are.
Yes, we know who you are too. And showing up on my page and making these really sort of absurd comments. And every time it happens, I just ban them. I reported to Facebook, and Facebook took them all, removed all of the profiles. And there's a lot of abuse on the internet. I mean, unfortunately, there's a lot of abuse. I mean, it's this entity which provides great opportunities for communication, the likes of which we've never had in human history before. But it also makes possible.
That's my dog.
One of our dogs is digging through the rug.
They're being very good. 6 dogs in this room.
There are 6 dogs. 6 dogs in this room, and everybody's being very quiet.
They're taking
and I think that there's a lot of abuse that goes out there. I see a lot of the women, because women are victimized in a patriarchal society anyway. I see a lot of really aggressive conduct directed toward women. It's very but it's a sexist society. It's a misogynistic society, so I guess it's no surprise. I see things going on that I think there's there's a lot of discriminatory conduct that goes on. I wish it didn't, but it's where we are.
But just because people like that have nothing better to do with their time, or they made that decision, you have something much better to do with your own. So
yes, and remember something.
On.
Remember something. The abolitionist approach is not just about veganism. Principle 5, we're nonviolent. Principle 5, rather, we reject all discrimination. Principle 6, we reject violence. So I think it's really important to, this is not just, the abolitionist approach recognizes that there's an inextricable link between human rights and animal rights. And it's really important to see that connection and to never forget it. And we never tolerate any discrimination that goes on that page. No racism, no sexism, no heterosexism. I know people get upset when I use the expression moral schizophrenia, and they say that it's ableist. And I've tried to explain to those people that they don't understand ableism, because nobody's saying that people who have clinical schizophrenia are immoral. They're just saying that, or I'm just saying that that we are delusional when we think about animals, in the same way that people who have clinical schizophrenia are delusional. We are all delusional when it comes to non-human animals. That's not an ableist comment at all. And those people who have called it that don't understand what ableism is, and simply, are using, I mean, they're making charges they don't really understand. But we don't accept, I don't tolerate any racism, sexism, classism, ableism, anything on that page. And if somebody makes a statement which is, racist or sexist, they leave. I show them the cyber door. And it's really important. I mean, look, in the end, Ben, this is about nonviolence. That's what this is all about. Nonviolence doesn't stop just at the animal question, at the animal issue. There are human implications. And
that leads into a question I've got from Sardar, who asks, it can seem hypocritical to non-vegans when vegans don't make a conscious effort not to avoid products of human rights abuses as well as being vegan. How can we overcome this issue?
Well, look, I just lost my head. Yeah, yeah. We have to work this out for future webinars. We'll just anyway. Look, we all have to try to do better. And one of the things I think is really important is I always ask myself now before I buy anything, do I really need it? Because look, all products are, everything that's produced results in harm to somebody, human or non-human. I mean, people work in these companies that make this stuff, and people are negligently injured, and there's all sorts of, all of our conduct has repercussions. And so I think it's really important to try to be mindful of these things, and to try to do, the best thing, as good a job as you can. Having said that, I think that by eating animals or wearing animals, we're engaging in we're engaging directly in violating the fundamental rights of animals. And for example, the distinction I would draw is this: if I build a road and I have a 60-mile-an-hour speed limit, I know I can tell X number of people will be killed on that road. That's still different from murdering that X number of people. So we engage in conduct where there's indirect and unintended consequences that are harmful. And those are a matter of concern, but they are still in a different category from those actions in which we engage where there are direct violations. As I say, building the road versus killing people. We all see the difference between those two situations. So, I do think that we ought to be concerned about unintended and incidental harm, but I think that, that you still have to be primarily concerned about direct harm. And I think what ends up in, we're all concerned, we all recognize this where humans are involved, but then where non-humans are involved, people say, well, wait a minute now. You don't want to participate in the direct exploitation of animals, but yet you engage in conduct in which there is unintended and incidental harm to humans. And the answer is, well, we all do that, but we all still think that murder is wrong. And I'm analogizing animal exploitation to murder. And so, and so I think we ought not to, sometimes a question like that assumes a certain speciesism. That is, when we start focusing on incidental harm to humans as a reason to not pay attention to the intentional harm to non-humans, where you would never do that in the human context, I think it can that can be problematic. Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, and you have a quote that about, there's no reason to stop fighting these human rights issues.
Oh yeah,
it doesn't stop you from buying the soy latte or the when you're going out to so you can do both.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I always say to people who are doing human rights work, when they say, well, you know, animal stuff is not my issue. I do battered women, or I'm worried about, you know, juvenile, you know, children's rights issues. I always say, that's great. Keep doing that work. That's great work. But you got to eat 3 times a day. Just don't put meat or dairy or eggs or honey into your mouth. You got to buy clothes. Don't wear leather or wool or fur or silk or whatever. You know, keep fighting the human rights issue. So if your issue is, you know, you're into gay rights, keep fighting gay rights. That's great. That's, you know, because even though we've made some progress, there's still an enormous amount of heteronormativity and heterosexism and homophobia. There's still a lot of problems. So you know what? You want to fight those things? Great, fight those things. But you got to eat, and you got to buy clothes, and you have to consume, you know, you have to, you know, you have to buy shampoo or soap or things like that. Just don't participate in the direct exploitation of animals by buying products or using products that have those ingredients. Just don't do it.
I mean, there are certainly remaining questions about whether a product is ethical.
Yeah, absolutely.
When you've looked at the list of ingredients or the content and found out that there's no animal element to it. I mean, if your very cheap clothing that is available, certainly here in the United States, probably in the countries that many of our participants tonight are living in, that cheap T-shirt that you're getting at a very low price, you know, was produced by someone in not good circumstances, who isn't being paid well, and with all the layers of profit that go from the time it was made to the time you bought it, you realize how much the person who made it is actually getting. So to disentangle this is going to be our life's works, all of us here's life's work. Now, people have, we've depressed wages, so there are people who rely on cheap products because they need to buy something. So it's no good the people who have more consumer choice saying it's unethical to buy that, because some people don't have as many consumer choices as other people do. And so, you know, we've tamped down dissent and by making people still be able to cover some of the basics at a low price. But we understand worldwide the impact and the abusiveness that can create. But this is a very big question of justice to disentangle. So we can all, at the forefront, say, is this something that doesn't involve animal use? And then try within our non-animal choices to make the best ethical choice there, and hold companies accountable, write to companies, find out what's going on. People who have the power of the purse, again, not everyone has that, but the people who do have it and can tell the stores and the producers, I'm making this choice because, will be listened to. So this is, you know, the tentacles of oppression are everywhere. So we make the best choices that we can. But the non-animal choice is usually fairly simple.
Yeah, I mean, look, the problem right now in terms of clothing in the United States is I don't think you can buy clothing here that is not made.
Right, it's almost impossible.
It's almost impossible to find clothing that isn't made in situations which are morally objectionable, sometimes really morally objectionable. But, you know, you make the best choices you can make. But where you're talking about, you know, we would never say, well, you know, we can't live perfect lives, so murder is okay. You know, it's all right to kill other human beings. We would never say that. Whereas the argument that is being made that you're you know, you're not making it, but you're describing it, is the argument that, well, you can't live a perfect life, so why does veganism matter? And the answer is because I see humans and non-humans as having an equal moral right not to be treated as things, and therefore participating directly in animal exploitation is analogous to participating directly in human exploitation, killing humans, making humans suffer, enslaving humans, and things like that. And so the fact that I can't live a perfect life that avoids all harm to humans doesn't mean that it's okay for me to murder humans. The fact that I can't live a perfect life in any other respect doesn't mean it's okay for me to continue to be responsible for killing animals. And you know, I mean, but we can make you know, we can modify our behavior. I mean, before the World Vegan Summit, I did not know. I loved cashews, you know. I just loved cashews. And Bill Terra, Marlene Watson Terra's partner, Marlene and Bill were speakers at the World Vegan Summit, and they're just magnificent people, really fascinating. And Bill spoke about a number of things, and one of the things he talked about was cashews. And I have not consumed cashews since the World Vegan Summit from last summer, because as a matter of fact, I came home and I try to find, is there any place I can find cashews that are not produced in the way, I don't know if those of you who are listening know, the way they're produced with some chemical that causes people's hands to get burned and stuff, and they get blind. It was horrible. I mean, the things that Bill showed were really horrible. And so I came home and I started trying to find cashews that were ethically produced. I couldn't, so I have not had cashews since I heard Bill speak. So, you know, you try to live a moral life, but I still think that direct and intentional exploitation is different from unintentional and unintended exploitation, or harm, rather, not exploitation, but harm.
Great. I've got another question here from the room, from Nagaraj. How do I convince my parents in India to give up dairy? They claim,
I'll give you that one.
they claim to consume milk only from domesticated cows in their home, never artificially impregnate, and only after the calves have had their share.
If your parents tell you that, they're lying to you. First of all, there's been quite a bit of work done in India on the dairy industry. India has the largest beef exporting. It's the largest beef exporting industry in the world, and I believe it is first or second in terms of dairy production. And so a nation that is much of it is Hindu ends up being a nation that's killing a lot of buffaloes are not sacred. Cows are. Buffaloes aren't. So buffaloes are slaughtered, and you know, there are religious views about the consumption of milk. That milk is that was Bob Linden actually calling me. Bob Linden was calling me on my phone. He obviously is not at this webinar, and I'm going to make that point when I do his show on Monday night. The idea that there isn't harm inflicted on animals for dairy in India is complete, utter nonsense. As I said, there's been empirical work done. People have gone to these small co-ops, these small rural co-ops, and they've seen, you know, the fact that you can't let the babies drink the milk to the extent that they want, because there will not be enough milk left for human consumption. That's just a fact. So even in the small dairy cooperatives in rural India, they're still finding the calves being separated from the mothers, the calves having their mouths closed, the calves being tethered so they can't, you know, that they can't access the mother and things like that. So this idea that there's no violence in certain milk production in India is a fantasy. I deal with it all the time because I'm very close to the Jain community. As a matter of fact, I have, you know, many of the views I have are really very much Jain views, and I'm always talking to the Jains who have this idea that dairy, you know, that meat is himsa, is violence, and dairy isn't. And I just gave a talk at Florida International University a couple months back. It was a named lecture that they have every year, and I was giving it this year. And what I've argued was, if you believe in nonviolence and you're consuming dairy or eggs, you don't believe in nonviolence, because those products are necessarily the result of violence.
I was so intrigued with what you were saying, I just lost my train of thought.
Yes, I was. You did look a little. You looked a little distant.
I was thinking about there being a link to that video. We'll see if we can find it and put it in the thread, because there was a video, wasn't there, of that that you just did a couple of months ago.
Yeah, and see, there's an interesting example of how I worked activism in. They invited me to give the lecture. I said I would come and do the lecture, but I wanted no animal products at the event. And they said, oh, well, they'll make vegan food. There'll be vegan food available. And I said, no, that's not what I said. What I said was, if you would like me to come and give the talk, which I'd be honored to give, I do not want any, I don't want any animal products in the room. And let me get rid of this. Anyway, that was Eric Weissman, who is the president of Evolution Dog Food Company, who makes the vegan kibble that we feed our dogs. So we know another vegan who is not on this webinar, Ben. We've got to do a better job next time. Anyway, so you know, and so that it was very interesting, because at first there was a little bit of resistance, but then it was agreed that they would do a completely vegan meal. And I said, no sugar. I did not want sugar, because unless it's organic sugar, it's bone charred in the United States. Most sugar here is bone charred. I did not want anything that was made with sugar. And they made a complete vegan meal. And the number of people who said, it was delicious, I had no idea you could make that dish or that dish without ghee or without raita, which is a yogurt that is used in Indian foods. And so, you know, but that was activism on several levels. Not only was I giving a talk about veganism and about how nonviolence required veganism, but I used the talk as an opportunity to make sure everybody was eating vegan, and they were seeing how delicious vegan food was. And there were Indian people there who didn't think you could have those sorts of meals without using clarified butter, or without using yogurt, or without using paneer, which is like a sort of a cottage cheese. And everything was made with soy. The cubes were made with soy. There was no raita, and there was oil used instead of clarified butter, and people were just amazed. So it was activism on different levels, on several levels.
Elizabeth in the room asks, what would your advice be to someone who wants to do abolitionist vegan advocacy, but is completely disheartened? Whoa, the question just disappeared. Completely disheartened. Hold on, I've got it on my phone. Bear with me while we go through this. Disheartened by the lack of interest from all the other activists in their community who prefer to do direct action everywhere or earthling experience, etc. How can they get support, or if not, start to do it on their own? Did you get that, or would you like me to repeat it?
No, I got it. Look, that's what the Abolitionist Approach Facebook page, I mean, there's a community of us now. We exist all over the place. You know, we're in different countries. We're in Western Europe. There's a fantastic group in Turkey, an absolutely fantastic group in Turkey of excellent advocates. There are people in Russia. There are people in South Korea. There are abolitionist advocates all over the place. So there's a community of us now. And again, the internet has made that formation of that community possible. So although we can say lots of bad things about the internet has made the formation of that community possible. We're here for you. We are here to provide backup, support, information. The Abolitionist Approach website has tons of free information and things that you can download for free. You can print them out yourself. You can get going. You can do things. The question that Elizabeth asked it's asking on several levels. One is, how do you get support? There's a community to provide support. How do you do it in the face of feeling disheartened because you're surrounded by welfareists and you're surrounded by people for whom it's all a matter of entertainment, whether it's a DXE event.
There's a strong entertainment.
Yeah, there's a lot a lot of those
get together
groups,
and yell at people.
Yeah, exactly. It's entertainment. Let those people do that stuff. You can't let yourself feel disheartened. As a matter of fact, it is in that situation that you need to be most adamant about your activism, most focused on your activism, because you're in a situation. I mean, these welfare. This is not. I don't know where Elizabeth is from. I don't know what community where she lives, but I don't care where she lives. Welfareists dominate everywhere. It's the dominant paradigm. It's the paradigm we've had for 200 years. It's a paradigm which allows people to continue to exploit animals and feel good about themselves. It's a paradigm that has allowed countless number of people to make a living being professional advocates, while they at the same time posture as moral heroes. It is insidious, it is corrupt, it is horrible. And as long as it continues, there will never be any progress. We have had animal welfare and forms of animal welfare for 200 plus years now. We're exploiting more animals now in more horrific ways than at any point in human history. So you can't feel disheartened. You've got to just continue on. I mean, I always look at it as the abolitionist approach. The website started in 2005. And in that fairly short period of time, 11, 12 years, we have built a movement of people all over the place who are talking about abolition. It's only going to work if people are willing to do the work and engage the issues. And yeah, I know it's disheartening when you're surrounded by people who talk about reducitarianism and who talk about, you know, meat-free Monday or meatless Monday or whatever, and people who are talking about, you know, why fur is bad, but they wear wool. These organizations that promote single-issue campaigns and welfare reform campaigns are horribly confused. It's disheartening because they are dominant. They are the dominant paradigm. That is our job, is to shift that paradigm, to move it away from treatment and move the discussion to use. That's what we need to do. And I understand it's disheartening, but again, you got to keep telling yourself, you're not the victim. Animal people, as I said before, and I really believe this, animal people have an ability to self-victimize in a way that I've never seen in any other group of people. They just have this ability to, you know, to be victims. And you know what? Everybody's a victim on some level. And some people are more victimized than others. That's for sure. That's absolutely for sure. But the bottom line is that animals are the in many ways as a group, the sort of the most vulnerable victims, the most, I mean, they're like children, they're like the elderly, they're like the mentally disabled. They are helpless, they are vulnerable, and they are victimized. We need to start seeing things from their perspective a little more and stop indulging ourselves to the extent that we do. I really believe that's important. This is, and those people who see this and want to fight this fight ought to consider themselves fortunate that they've gotten to that point, and that they see this and that they want to fight about it. Be happy, be happy that you've gotten to that point, and think about, you know, what's the alternative? Living your life in sort of moral blindness? Is that the solution? You know, I mean, and so I look at it as, you know, don't be discouraged. Don't be discouraged.
And also, if you're the people that you think should be your comrades in this are only interested in doing sort of the confrontational yelling stuff, and that leaves you with, you've got this idea of your head of this single lonely figure out there tabling or something, then there are all sorts of points of contact, as we spoke with at the beginning, where you can make a difference. If you're not quite sure of what to do, go and volunteer at your local shelter. Let's not denigrate the hands-on effect you can have with animals who desperately need a home. First of all, you meet all sorts of people who are interested in animals because they're there to adopt an animal who needs to be rescued and rehomed. So they are prime people to talk to.
Absolutely.
And the other people who volunteer, go and be the person who takes those fantastic pictures of animals who need a home, who captures who they are, rather than these some of the intake pictures that get put on the internet from shelters don't give any idea of what the animal is like.
Shots, aren't they?
Exactly. So you be the person who gets the animal to relax and so that you can capture a great picture. So many animals someone falls in love with that picture, and you can make such a difference. Keep animals socialized, learn how to do the basics so that you can help people when they bring animals home. Do you know how many people I've helped house train dogs and cats because they went and got a dog or a cat, and no one gave them any information, and they bring a dog home, and then they go to work and give the dog the run of the house, and surprise, surprise, it may not be so great when you open the door and you come home. It's amazing what people don't know. So you can be useful about keeping a dog or a cat who's found a new home, stay in that home. That's activism too. And boy, are there so many opportunities to talk to someone around that issue.
Absolutely. People who are into, who do shelter work, they're prime for talking to you about veganism, because, you can focus them on what's the difference between the animals we love and the animals we stick forks into. There's no answer to that question. There is no difference. And so you can really, the number of people that we've turned on to veganism who were, basically people we met as, being, we live with 6 dogs. So when we're walking our dogs and stuff, we're always having conversations with other dog people who have dogs, or, and so, you have discussions with those people about what's the difference between, they get all upset about the fact that they eat dogs in Asian countries. We always point out there's, it's horrible that they eat dogs in Asian countries, but there's no difference between eating a dog in an Asian country and eating a cow in a Western country. And it's just, it's just the sort of, that doesn't make any sense. And, we have those discussions all the time. But look, there are so many opportunities. It's working in, volunteering in shelters. It's talking to people in your daily life. It's tabling. It's doing a reading group. There are people who do reading groups, and, where they get, they will get some, for example, the International Vegan Association, David Langlois and Eric Prescott and their colleagues, they have this I think that's fabulous activism, where they bring people in from all over the world and they read, the basic. Did you do that program, Ben?
I couldn't get the right time of the day for me.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. But everybody, everybody who's participated in that has just found it to be absolutely wonderful. That's excellent activism. There are so many different. She's a puppy mill dog. Hello. And there are so many different sorts of things that individuals can do. It's endless. But the thing that's really important, I want to go back to this idea. Don't be depressed or feel that it's you against the world. There's a community of us out there, and there are a lot of us who care, and tap into that community. That's why we have the Facebook page. The Facebook page actually was not set up as what some people think it's supposed to be, which is a place where welfarists come and tell me what a bad person I am. That was not surprise. That was not the purpose of the Facebook page. The purpose of the Facebook page was to set up a place where people who were into abolition could come and gather and could further their knowledge about abolition and interact with other people from all over the world who were interested in abolition. That's what the purpose of the Facebook site is, and it's not, that's what it's for. And so use that. That I put time into that precisely for that reason, because we're trying to build a community. And indeed, one of my resolutions for 2017 is for Anna to get a Facebook profile so she can participate as well. And so, I don't particularly care for a lot of this social. A lot of it is problematic for me in lots of ways, and but I do think it provides excellent opportunities for communication. Does it provide opportunities for people who are morally challenged, who sit and spend all day creating fake profiles so they can come and say idiotic things on your page? And the answer is yes, that's frustrating. But as I said, that's why God created delete buttons. You just ban them and move on and have discussion. So yes, it's annoying, but so what? You're always going to find petty, small-minded people in every walk of life.
I wanted to just quickly, because we've just touched the second hour, on a question by Francisco, which I think is interesting in terms of being a professional advocate as opposed to making it your job when you're talking to people about veganism. And that is, what career paths would you recommend for people who want to dedicate their lives to spreading veganism while making a decent living? I'm a computer engineer, seriously considering changing my career path and studying nutrition. I have a feeling I know how you're going to answer this. Now I'd answer it myself.
Well, I mean, if you have skills that translate into some vegan business or something, and that's something that you want to do, then that's useful. We get this question a lot in terms of our profession, and saying, oh, I want to change the world for animals, and how can I do that as a lawyer? And people, I think, are often disappointed that I don't point them to something that will be a full-time job as a lawyer doing animal stuff, because most of the things that provide a normal living are not good situations for moving the argument forward. So I always tell people, be the best that you can be in your profession and donate your time and your energy and your perspective, as has happened with nearly every other social movement. There's a real problem, I think, with the professionalization of this movement.
Yeah.
There are too many organizations. We do not need another executive director of anything. Social revolutions, as we said before, are not tax deductible. Charities will not bring about serious change. There are instances where we need hands-on supported work. That's obviously with protecting children and things like that. But in terms of changing minds, the abolitionist approach is going to be no different than any of the other radical social movements that have taken place throughout time, that have drawn on every single background, on every expertise, and people who wanted to do something and were not being challenged and usually compromised by the need to make a buck at it. Once it becomes your job, it's very hard to be effective.
Absolutely. And I think you don't judge the power of a movement by how many people are doing it full time, engaged in it full time. You judge the power of a movement by how many people in their everyday lives share these ideals and live by them. I mean, Francisco, I think you said, was a computer engineer. I mean, I can tell you this, that the need for people who are good with computers to help in the abolitionist cause is just phenomenal. So, I mean, if Francisco, has a job as a computer engineer and can donate some time in the evenings or on the weekends, there are all sorts of things that need to be done. There are all sorts of things that I would like to do, for example, that, I'm limited with the computer, with these, I'm not really very good with the computer. And so I rely on other people. And there are a number of people who help me do things, and that's their primary contribution to activism, is helping to spread the abolitionist approach by providing computer backup. So computer engineers can do a magnificent, they can provide a magnificent service, because we're living at a time in which those skills are absolutely necessary in order to communicate on a look, let me tell you, Ben, this webinar jam software, I'm glad you're using it and some of the other moderators are using it, because it requires, it took you some startup time to get, I mean, again, right. You committed to it. And so, I mean, I think people, we can't denigrate anyone's skills. Everybody can do something. You don't have to leave, and I do think that there's a really serious problem with this idea that the way you do it is by getting a job, making a living. And I often find, it's like these organizations, that they, oh, let's take a pledge, to be vegan. Here's a donate button. I need your contributions in order to tell you that you ought to take a pledge to go vegan. I mean, what is this? Why do people need donate buttons on websites where they're doing things that don't, I just don't understand that. I mean, we're turning this into a big business, and, it's not activism, it's business. And I think that that's a serious problem.
Okay, well, I think we need to finish up. We do have so many questions here, and I think probably the best way to address them is for us to forward them through to you, Gary, and maybe you do some more of your thoughts for the day and just speak for a few moments on each of these questions. But one resounding question that's been coming through is about us uniting as vegan advocates, regardless of the way we approach it. Would you like to speak to that in terms of, shouldn't we all be just getting along, even though some of us are doing single issue campaigns and others are abolitionist vegans, etc.?
No. No. The short answer to that is no. Look, single issue campaigns and welfare campaigns promote animal exploitation. We don't have enough time now, although I'd be happy to go for another 4 or 5 hours. But the reality is, I've argued to quite a degree that single issue campaigns and welfare reform campaigns are not only morally problematic, but they're practically, they present practical problems, because what they do is they require the coalitions of people, including a lot of people who promote exploitation, in order to characterize certain exploitation is better than other sorts of exploitation. And this sends out a moral message that certain sorts of exploitation are better than and acceptable, and acceptable than other forms of exploitation. This is the wrong thing to do. So no, I don't believe at all in this idea that we all ought to be joining together. I have nothing in common with welfareists. I have nothing in common with single issue campaign people. I'm going to tell you a quick story of something that happened to me today in the parking lot at Whole Foods Market, which is a supermarket that we have here that sells a lot of meat, it sells a lot of fish and dairy and stuff, but it has fresh vegetables, and I often go there to get them. And today I witnessed an argument between two people. One of the people was wearing a full-length mink coat. It was obviously a very expensive coat, and a younger woman who was arguing with her, and I stopped and I watched the argument. It was quite heated, and the woman who was arguing against the fur turned to me and said, "I'm arguing with her about this coat. I just find it outrageous." And I said to her, "Well, let me ask you a question." I said, "The coat you're wearing," because I recognized the coat she was wearing was clearly a wool coat, coat.
Yeah. And
I said, "The coat you're wearing, what's it made out of?" And she said, "Wool." And I said, the problem is, until you see, I said, "Are you vegan?" She was, "No, I'm not a vegan." And I said, "This is the problem. The problem is, until you see veganism as the only thing that makes sense, you end up drawing arbitrary lines." And so you have single issue campaigns where you get people yelling at people who are wearing fur, and the people who are yelling are wearing wool and leather. Or you get people who are, who don't eat meat but who consume dairy, yelling at people who consume meat. You have demonstrations against slaughterhouses, and you have all of these incredibly absurd, incoherent approaches. If we believe animals matter morally, there is one and only one rational response, and that is you stop treating them as commodities, and that requires that you be vegan. It's really quite logical, and it's really quite airtight. So this idea that we ought to work together with the people who are promoting welfare is nonsense. The people who are promoting welfare are promoting the idea that animal exploitation that is done in a better, more humane way is morally better or morally acceptable, depending on what position these people take. And I don't really care what position they take because those positions are all wrong. When you take the position that foie gras is bad, and you have a coalition of people who are going against the consumption of foie gras, who consume steak and chicken and fish and dairy and eggs, as if those products are morally better than foie gras, all you're doing is fomenting confusion. I have no interest in doing that.
I think it's really useful if people would go and look at the materials on that issue on the Abolitionist Approach website, because it's dealt with in quite a lot of detail in several essays that you've done. Excuse me. Because the criticism of single issue campaigns is not just, oh, it's a different way of doing things, or
it's a wrong way of doing things.
Our friends do it, and their friends do something else. We need to learn a bit of politics and a bit of economics. There's a basis for this, and single issue campaigns do not work, and they also give the wrong message. So I would really encourage people to spend the time and read an essay and think about it, because it's not a random criticism. This goes to the core of, one, the theory, and two, what actually will make a difference. I think we're all so frustrated about the enormity of the animal abuse, but we need to talk about how we really get to the core of dismantling animal use. So I don't think we should just say, well, I need to do something, so I'll do this. We need to keep the vision and the theory clear in our minds, so we know what are practical, useful steps to dismantling this.
I mean, look, animal welfare doesn't work because it can't work,
right.
And most animal advocates don't understand why that's the case. Animals are chattel property. It costs money to protect their interests. So we're always going to be providing very little protection to those interests unless we get an economic benefit from doing so. That keeps the welfare standards low, which is why basically the most humanely treated animal products you buy, that you can buy, are produced from under conditions which would be called torture if humans were involved. I don't care how humane they are. And ultimately, they all involve injustice because they all involve killing animals and treating animals as resources and killing them. So the bottom line is this can't work. It's morally problematic. It's also practically problematic. And so this idea that, well, we got different ways of looking at this, the answer is no, sorry. Your way of looking at this is so clearly problematic and so clearly uninformed by not only moral theory, but by economics, by law, basically. And look, Ben, we've had how many people working on animal welfare and single issue campaigns? How much money goes into that nonsense? Look at what we've done in the abolitionist movement in a fairly short period of time, just with grassroots activists in various countries doing what they're doing. It takes a very small segment of the population to really change the discourse. If all the animal people were united in opposing animal exploitation and were promoting the idea that we should abolish animal exploitation, we could change the discussion overnight. We could move the discussion. It wouldn't mean that we're going to have a vegan world overnight, but it would mean that we would change the discussion. Right now, the discussion is still focused on treatment. It needs to be refocused and focused on use and the issue of justifying use, which we can't do.
All right.
So 2017, let's go and make final point from me. 2017, let's all go and do our job in making more vegans. Gary has said, and it's absolutely true. And until you're vegan, nothing changes in terms of the animal situation. And once you are vegan, everything changes. Vegans don't go to rodeos. Vegans don't go to zoos. Vegans don't go to SeaWorld. Vegans don't wear fur coats. We need the vegan education to get a critical mass of vegans who will then have a voice, and eventually even a voice in the political system. We don't have that right now, and we can't until we have the numbers. So everyone needs to go off. I am, he is, you are. Go and make more vegans this year. Then we have a voice that people will listen to and understand.
Exactly. Don't underestimate the power of making one new vegan at
Absolutely.
least in 2017.
Absolutely. Go to the Thunderclap. Go to Gary Francione, the Abolitionist Approach to Animal Rights. get our Thunderclap page. Make sure you get the right one, the one that we're doing, and go there. And tomorrow you can be responsible for sending out, basically getting close to 600,000 messages promoting abolitionist veganism, not welfarist veganism, not try veganism for a while, not, veganism, none of this reducitarian stuff. The basic, get out the idea that if animals matter morally, we cannot eat them, wear them, use them. We cannot treat them as commodities. This requires that we go vegan. So be part of that tomorrow. It's creative, nonviolent vegan advocacy. And all it does is that all it requires, doesn't require any money. It just requires that you allow them to put a message in your Facebook profile or your timeline or whatever those things are called, and a message in your Twitter or Tumblr feed.
Terrific. Okay. Now remember, abolitionistapproach.com. That's where you have any questions about things that we haven't covered today. Put it in the search field. I guarantee, or almost guarantee, there'll be an article about something that you need answers on. If not, ask a question on the Abolitionist Approach page on Facebook. HowDoIGoVegan.com is a great resource, not only if you're vegan, but particularly if you've got friends and family. You can send them to that. There's all sorts of resources. So HowDoIGoVegan.com, there's also a Facebook page, and put your friends and family onto that page. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up. I thank everybody in the room for your wonderful questions. I'm sorry we didn't have time for more. Gary would have gone on for hours, but we all can't do that. Thank you to Gary and Anna for your time once again and your wisdom in sharing your advocacy. We look forward to your book, but we also just these webinars give us a chance to have these sorts of conversations, which are very relatable. And if your friends are interested in veganism, you can point them towards these videos and watch them, even if it's in bits. That's the beauty of videos. You can stop and come back to it. It doesn't have to be in the one lot. So it'll be goodbye from Gary and Anna, and have a very good new year, and let's make it closer to a vegan world.
Happy New Year, everyone.
Thank you.